What's up, guys? Flygon, the Mystic Pokemon. A 6'7" tall antlion, not exactly a dragonfly. Despite the name, fans were first introduced to this unique dragon type in the 3rd generation as the evolution of Trapinch and Vibrava. Now, some suspect that it had its name switched with Salamence, seeing as the other dragon's pre-evolutions were Bagon and Shelgon, both sharing the Gon suffix with Flygon. Not to mention that Bagon's dream has always been to fly as well. Anyway, some species of dragonflies are referred to as sand dragons, which is where Flygon and its pre-evolution's distinctive typing draws from. Ever since its appearance in Jirachi Wishmaker, where it battled a fake Groudon, Flygon has held a place in fans' hearts. We all enjoy our favorite Pokemon being useful in competitive play, and that leads us to the question, how good was Flygon actually? And in this video, we'll be covering these competitive formats. Flygon is not one of the biggest names in Advanced overused. It doesn't possess the superb defense prowess of Skarmory, the wrecking ball strength of Heracross, or the all-around superiority of Tyranitar. There is a plethora of excellent Pokemon that can handle it one way or another. Its stats are decent, but wholly unspectacular. Its move pool doesn't extend very far. It tends to invite in one of the most brutal Pokemon in the tier, Gengar, and it's got a nasty quadruple ice weakness, in a tier where Ice Beams, Ice Punches, and Hidden Power Ices are lurking around every corner. Thus, you could be forgiven if you thought Flygon was a thoroughly mediocre choice in the metagame. Even some slightly less experienced players tend to think that because of its less than flashy results. However, it is quite the contrary. While Flygon may not be a high-profile defining metagame superstar along the likes of Celebi and Suicune, it is quietly but significantly one of the best, most important Pokemon in the metagame. Failure to account for it properly can lead to devastation both offensively and defensively for even the best battlers. Now that we've gone over its negatives, let's see why Flygon is so effective in the tier by examining its numerous positives. The first thing that stands out is its dragon and ground typing. It is resistant to poison, fire, rock, and immune to electric. It also has the ability Levitate, so it is immune to ground as well. This isn't exactly a shabby array of things to be effective against. Its types actually complement each other well, and thanks to its part dragon typing, it is a ground type that is not weak to water or grass. Now, this all sounds well and good, but how does this apply to real battle scenarios? Because for example, it doesn't do much good to know that Magneton resists 13 of the 17 types, but just dies to a real common move like Earthquake. So let's consider the important factors of the advanced metagame. There are two important factors of the advanced metagame called Sandstorm and Spikes, which shape the landscape of overuse. And to understand Flygon, first you gotta understand them. Tyranitar reigns supreme, and its nearly omnipresent Sandstream is a major factor in shaping nearly every aspect of the metagame. Leftovers being nullified on important Pokemon such as Zapdos and Suicune, and non-leftovers holders such as some Heracross and Salamence have major ramifications on how players are capable of dealing with them, to the extent that a leftovers Heracross becomes much more difficult for certain teams to outmaneuver, as they usually rely on it being slowly worn down. The spikes laid down by mainly Skarmory as well as Fortress and Cloyster are another massively crucial element of the metagame since they're easy to lay down. Like Sand, they're permanent unless spun, and they hit a significant amount of Pokemon. There are very few Pokemon that are both immune to Sandstream and Spikes, and quite a number of Pokemon that are affected by both. Top tier ones too, like Celebi, Suicune, and Snorlax. To some, such as Celebi, their added weakness to Dugtrio on top of the residual makes it even more difficult to function. Thus, the two are very often combined for powerful residual damage combinations that are set up and abused by some of the strongest Pokemon around. The limited number of Pokemon in overuse that are immune to both of these things are Skarmory, Claydol, Aerodactyl, and of course, Flygon. Now, simply being immune to both of them does not make a good Pokemon, or else Gligar would be an effective choice in overuse. So let's examine Flygon's other qualities. Earlier, we mentioned its resistances. It nearly never uses its poison resistance because of Sludge Bomb's 30% poison rate, and the fact that it struggles against Weezing, although it can potentially scare out Venusaur at certain health ranges. Its fire resistance is quite effective against the occasional Moltres, Charizard, or Camerupt, and can effectively pivot into Fire Blast from mixed Tyranitar and Hidden Power Fires from Celebi. Next up, the electric immunity. While some electric types like most Jolteon and offensive variants of Zapdos carry Hidden Power Ice, the immunity to Thunderbolt can let Flygon switch in and draw the HP Ice to a teammate that doesn't want to eat a powerful stab attack, but can deal with them one-on-one, such as Tyranitar or Jirachi. Indeed, Flygon's ability to pivot switch in on so much, if even just for a turn, is one of Flygon's greatest qualities, and since it's not getting worn down by residual damage, it lets it stay healthy for quite a while and thus be a dangerous presence going into the late game where most other Pokemon are weakened. Also, Swampert is an enormous presence in Advance, and thus Hidden Power Grass is a common choice as well. So Flygon is notable for its ability to wall both Hidden Powers on Electrics in conjunction with Swampert, a common combination from the days of Net Battle. Next, its rock resistance is incredibly valuable because of the power of Aerodactyl and Tyranitar, often used in conjunction. Of course, a rock resistance doesn't help much without the sturdiness against Earthquake, or in this case, a complete immunity to Earthquake thanks to Levitate. Its Levitate ability, gifting it ground immunity, means it is impervious to Dugtrio's Arena Trap, the ever-present spikes as mentioned before, and various earthquakes, including those from fierce choice banders like Tyranitar, Salamence, Metagross, Aerodactyl, and other Flygon. This, combined with its rock resistance, gives it a unique resistance to the powerful attacking combination of Quake Slide, which is the combination of Rock Slide and Earthquake, notable for its widespread and synergistic type coverage. And OU, only Claydol and the very rare Breloom share this distinction. If you're still doubting Flygon's capabilities and influence, this resistance to Quick Slide frustrates standard Dragon Dance and Mixed Tyranitar so much that it sometimes runs Ice Beam solely for Flygon. There are side benefits of course, such as hitting Salamence and weaken Zapdos without risking a Rock Slide miss, but it barely scratches another significant counter, Claydol. Thus, it speaks to how important Flygon actually is. It can't be emphasized enough how valuable Flygon's immunity to ground is. Its ability to stick around in the face of powerful, permanent residual damage mirrors Aerodactyl's. Thus, having a check that can similarly play the War of Attrition is extremely valuable. Of course, Flygon's defensive stats aren't tremendous. Uninvested variants definitely don't want to walk into a stray Double Edge or Hidden Power flying from Aerodactyl. However, its type advantage against rock and ground helps one play around it in conjunction with its other checks like Jirachi, Swampert, Skarmory, and Metagross, who can tank Aerodactyl's other moves easily. A defensive set for Flygon also popped up in recent years. With investment, it's actually quite effective at tanking Aerodactyl at the cost of offensive capabilities, which we'll get to later. It uses a set of Earthquake, Protect a la Swampert to maximize its leftovers recovery, rack up residual damage, and scout dangerous moves such as Explosions or those of Choice Banders. Then usually the combination of Toxic and Rock Slide, with auxiliary options being Fire Blast and Hidden Power Ghost. Rock Slide is generally the best because it hits specially defensive Zapdos, although if that's handled, Hidden Power Ghost is decent for Refresh Claydol and doing a bit more to Celebi. Both of these moves' main use is actually to dent Gengar switching, who often use Flygon as entry and is a Pokemon you do not want coming in for free if you can help it. Fire Blast isn't good at beating down healthy Skarmory, but it can finish it off at low health and keeps Fortress out of your face to maintain spikes. This set is notable for being able to choke out several offensive teams without too much effort. A common term in Advance is TSS, which means Toxic Sandstorm Spikes, all 3 permanent residual damage factors, and Flygon helps abuse that to the fullest. And now that we've gone over Flygon's defensive capabilities, let's examine it offensively. Now, its offenses are not OU's answer to Rayquaza by any means, but base 100 attack is solid, and it has access to one of the most tried and true strategies since Red, Blue, and Yellow: Stab Earthquake. A set of Earthquake, Rock Slide, Hidden Power Bug, and Fire Blast is notable for dealing at least decent damage to everything in Overuse with the right move, with the exception of Porygon 2, because, you know, Trace. It can also use Toxic over one of the last 2 moves to really cripple Waters. Substitute can be used in the last slot to ease prediction and dodge Toxic, often from the likes of Zapdos hoping to take a hit in exchange for permanently crippling Flygon. Hidden Power Ghost is an option, but as with the defensive set, Pursuit Tyranitar is one of its best friends for dealing with Gengar. It can run a simple max attack, max speed set with a naive nature, or it can drop speed for the sake of some bulk, potentially going with plus attack to really dish out some impressive numbers. It has this luxury thanks to its extremely solid 100 base speed. Running a plus speed nature can allow it to outrun standard bulky Dragon Dance Tyranitar after a dance. Doing this also outruns the vast majority of Salamence, which can be good for dropping Rock Slides and bulky Gengar variants, as well as going toe-to-toe with the other base 100s in the tier, Zapdos, Jirachi, and Celebi, which can be crucial as those Pokemon have offensive variants you'll often want every bit of insurance possible against. Now, it was mentioned earlier how teams that neglect to account for Flygon are often in for a rough time, and even those that do can struggle because 2 of its checks, Skarmory and Gengar, are prone to trapping, while traditional physical walls like bulky Waters do not appreciate the full brunt of an invested Stab Earthquake. Nowhere is this truer than when Choice Band Flygon makes an appearance, who can invalidate even bulky Gengar as a check, since Rock Slide and Sand 2-hit KOs, and HP Ghost is a viable option, as it isn't absolutely essential to hit Celebi as hard as possible. If a Pokemon is not resistant or immune to Earthquake, it's going to take an absolute ton of damage, and that's without the help of spikes. Even the bulkiest Suicune, often the end-all be-all when it comes to raw physical bulk, is cleanly 3-hit KO'd in Sand by a Jolly variant. Swampert takes 1 hit and is suddenly in trouble for any assault afterwards. Milotic and Vaporeon get absolutely hammered. Bulky Tyranitar, Metagross, and Jirachi variants that hope to take a hit in a pinch have no chance. Pokemon that can withstand Earthquake in some capacity or another, such as Salamence, Zapdos, Claydol, and Celebi, are torn apart by its standard coverage and Rock Slide or Hidden Power Bug. Some players have even used HP Flying to surprise Heracross if their team is weak to it. It also retains the super effective hit on Celebi and threatens to 2-hit KO bulky Gengar and Sand. Of course, Protect using teams can give those Choice Banded variants a hard time, but it's manageable to play around, and Flygon remains capable of seriously threatening every team when it comes to hitting the entire metagame hard. And Porygon 2, who utterly despises Toxic. It is a great Aerodactyl-esque example of using the Sand and Spikes it's immune to wear down its checks while staying staying alive itself. Its weaknesses to big threats are notable, and it requires support as well as a player who is really on top of things, but there are few things more fearsome than a fortress stall team, going up against a smart player wielding a choice band Flygon. It is clear that Flygon is one of the most significant pieces of the advanced metagame, and we'll conclude this generation by mentioning that Flygon is a member of some of the most famous, effective advanced teams of all time. It had been used by Loki on his Mike Jones team, in which he won the official Smogon Tournament 3 with. He explained that in the early 386, after Fire Red and Leaf Green were released and thus all known Pokemon were available, unlike in the Ruby and Sapphire 200 metagame, Flygon wasn't too popular, but people slowly realized its effectiveness in handling electric types alongside Swampert and weakening water types with its powerful Stab Earthquake, helping set up monsters such as Dragon Dance Tyranitar for a sweep alongside Spikes. Loki's team used all of these elements, even using a second water in Milotic to guard against the wear down the water assault. The most notable example of Flygon's effectiveness though is on two-time Smogon Tour winner veteran and Love's famous team, Superman. Used for years by several other notable advanced players such as Goofball and G80, the team packed 4 Pokemon immune to Spikes while abusing them and Sandstream so that it could stick around for long games and clean up at the end. 3 of its Pokemon were completely immune to Sandstorm Spikes in addition to Flygon, and 5 of its Pokemon were immune to Sandstorm. It packed Skarmory to lay the spikes and Aerodactyl whose speed let it clean up at the end of battles. This meant that even if the other player laid down 3 layers of spikes, the Tyranitar and Swampert, the only 2 Pokemon affected by them on the team, would still not be dying immediately. Tyranitar would deal massive damage and Swampert packed recovery in either protect or rest, so the team could easily withstand the long game. The sole sand affected Pokemon, Zapdos, was of course immune to spikes and carried rest and was thus a key part of the team. Flygon's place on this legendary squad is a testament to how key it really was in the advanced generation. Gen 4 brought a lot of things Flygon liked. Stealth Rock and Draco Meteor for higher overall damage being dealt, Magnezone for improved Skarmory killing, and especially U-Turn, which it became unique for as it was one of the few effective Pokemon to learn it and definitely the only Dragon type. With its new Stealth Rock resistance and Toxic Spikes immunity, it found itself once more sticking around as the Pokemon around it were worn down, and became one of the best wielders of Choice Scarf, with U-Turn retaining momentum and its stab attacks viciously effective for finishing battles when backed by its newfound speed. Of course, there were things Flygon didn't particularly care for. The new walls like Hippowdon and Gliscor, as well as Cresselia and early Diamond and Pearl, did not care much for its flimsy attacks. Skarmory gained Roost and Shed Shell as well. This is also when Garchomp was around, and it really ruled the roost as not only a far stronger Dragon ground type, but one of the most powerful Pokemon around, complete with its ridiculous Sand Veil to compensate for lack of Levitate. Once Chomp was banned and Platinum came around, Flygon began being used consistently, with its Choice Scarf set always ready to revenge a dangerous threat thanks to its stabs being strong enough to deal with their frailer offensive Pokemon, such as the new popular Infernape. Now, it wasn't exactly blowing everything in its path away. Scizor became the king, and the other dragons like Salamence, with its newly gained Outrage, and the unbanned Latias were always around. Plus, Swords Dance Lucario's incredibly powerful extreme speed didn't particularly care for Flygon's high speed, and while Outrage was effective in taking out certain threats, others would use it as setup opportunity. However, while it wasn't a world beater, Flygon quietly always existed as an effective revenge killer. It could never do anything else. It was extremely outclassed as a purely offensive Pokemon, but in this role it almost always did its job. It was an important part of many effective teams, often in the semi-stall style. They weren't pure offensive as they preferred to have a backbone and enjoyed laying down hazards, but they weren't bulky enough to be full stall, and thus needed a fail-safe Pokemon to revenge kill the many dangerous threats in the DPP metagame. Flygon held many of these teams together with a quiet game in, game out efficiency. In these days it was often Flygon or Jirachi. They were both quite effective, but using Scarf Flygon allowed one to use a different Jirachi set. Also, while dragons were competition in terms of dishing out incredible levels of damage, they were also food for a late game outrage sweep. Scizor and Flygon made for a great combination, and Steels and Dragons always do well together thanks to their type synergy. But these two were especially excellent because they helped check the fierce dragons that ruled their tier and maintained momentum with U-Turn. The power of Latias and Salamence was such that some felt the metagame revolved around both the dragons and their checks who were the steel types. In the cases of Magnezone and Heatran, they pulled double duty in a sense because they also helped handle steals. The high octane metagame led to some 3 dragon 3 steel teams being used, and Flygon was almost always the third dragon. This is where the drag mag strategy originated. In theory, Magnezone eliminates the only type that resists dragon, and then the dragons go crazy. Eventually, Latias was banned, and Flygon's days of tying with +1 Salamence were soon over, as Salamence was also banned as well. Of course, Dragonite rose as a result, but Flygon was the one who truly began to shine in this post-Dragons metagame. Its Choice Scarf set was effective as ever, and became one of the front runners as a flagship Pokemon in the metagame. Shuka Berry Heatran was popping up everywhere, and adamant variants of Flygon, no longer afraid of Jolly Salamence, could dispatch it, despite the Resistance Berry denying it Stealth Rock or an explosion. It still outran all of the Rotom forms, which was the next fastest Scarfer, even with Adamant nature. Some people even vied for the importance of a late game speed type with either another Flygon or a Scarf Jirachi, as well as outrunning the newly popular Dragon Dance Tyranitar after 2 Dragon Dances, and Timid Empoleon after an Agility. However, these and other things Flygon failed to outspeed with an Adamant nature like Scarf, Roserade, and Lucario were fairly niche, while the power boost it gained for being Adamant was often tangible, because it could now revenge kill a dented offensive Suicune at higher health, and also threaten to 2-hit KO Gliscor after Stealth Rock, since those things often use speed investment to get the most out of their stall-breaking taunt sets. Gliscor was still the go-to check to Scarf Flygon on most teams, since it generally tanked it well and roosted off the damage, and was the best counter to Swords Dance Lucario. However, this led to a new Flygon variant popping up, the mixed set with Draco Meteor. With no Salamence around to outclass it, the Choice Scarf set's utter effectiveness necessitating Gliscor to switch in, and thus making it a terrific lure which Lucario could then abuse, resistance to residual damage, instant recovery and roost, and a menacing presence even after the set was revealed. Flygon showed itself to be more than a one-trick pony that would often terrorize popular stall teams. Many unsuspecting Fortress were threatened out or even caught off guard with powerful Life Orb Fire Blast. Flygon continued to shine. It was a hugely important part of the new offensive teams of the metagame and consistently did its job. Its last move could be anything really, like Thunder Punch specifically for Gyarados, Stone Edge for a wider range of flying types such as Zapdos and Togekiss, Toxic for a surprise on a bulky wall such as Hippowdon or Gliscor, or even Dragon Claw for a spammable attack to revenge the likes of Kingjar or Gengar, without locking itself into Outrage. However, it had one more trick left, and not the gimmicky stall variant. Just like Gen 3, a Choice Band set. While in the post-Dragons metagame, Dragonite had popped out and shown how vicious banded Outrage could be, Flygon exchanged some of that raw strength for increased ability to switch in and out, further abused by a stronger U-turn, key speed which outran dangerous Pokemon like Suicune, and a destructive secondary stab attack. Choice Band Flygon remains a threat because it is extremely tough to wear down, and if it's not ready to punch a hole in the other team, it can just U-turn out to keep offensive momentum. Of course, it always has the Kamikaze option of blasting everything in its path with Outrage. While like the mixed set, it now struggles with being revenge killed on offensive threats by the likes of Starmie, Gengar, and Infernape, it still has entry against enough Pokemon to where it will be effective. It now has 3 distinct sets, able to turn its defensive capabilities into offensive destruction of different kinds, and the Scarfer is always capable of cleaning up any team at the end of the game. All in all, despite a slow beginning, Flygon quietly became a key part of the metagame and ended up as one of the most important players in it. And as we all know, Black and White redefined the term power creep with its permanent weather and monstrous new threats. Defensively, not only did Ferrothorn come into play, Flygon's old nemesis Gliscor returned with status immunity and increased recovery, and even the previous Uber Mew dropped down to give everyone grief with its taunt Will-O-Wisp set. On the offensive side, a plethora of new insanely strong dragons arrived, not to mention the vicious Terrakion, Volcarona, and Reuniclus, with sky-high stats among all their other crazy attributes. Flygon was really only thought about when discussing the old generation 4 standbys that couldn't keep up with the new metagame, and dropped into underuse. There, however, Flygon thrived along its fellow former overuse like Swampert, Suicune, Zapdos, Bronzong, Roserade, Shaman, Kingdra, Weavile, and Snorlax were all familiar faces whose bag of tricks were just right for the power of underuse. Similar tactics from previous generations thrived. Flygon was immune to the ever-present spikes while abusing them itself, in which it teamed up with Swampert pretty well to wall Zapdos and Raikou, and the Scarf set was a great revenge killer, although Jolly was preferred for new threats such as Quiver Dance Venomoth and Choice Scarf Crocodile and Darmanitan. On the other hand, Adamant was preferred to the Choice Band variant, which was a monstrous wall crusher, especially with the lack of Skarmory and generally bulky steel types, with the exception of Bronzong, who did not care for a banded Fire Punch. Swampert, Slowbro, Milotic, Suicune, and Blastoise would crumple in the face of those powerful outrages. Of course, Flygon was never overwhelming. The metagame was generally equipped to play around it decently, in addition to Pokemon like Porygon 2 that gave it trouble, but it played a big part in the so-called Black and White underuse feels like Diamond and Pearl overuse metagame, and was always a top tier in that meta, an effective contender for any team. Denied a mega evolution thanks to an unfortunate case of artist block, Flygon's all-around formerly average at best stats became more and more mediocre, or worse in relation to its competitors without any boost to speak of except the newly changed Defog, which was being used by far better Pokemon like Latios. The strong new fairy types such as Clefable and Azumarill didn't do it any favors either, and with Florges reigning in underuse, Flygon fell to rarely use, where it finally found a home for the 6th generation, in the tier often defined by the incredibly powerful defensive core of Registeel and Alomomola on balance, with Venusaur often being hit hard. Flygon tends to follow them up in the 4th slot thanks to its access to Defog and good speed for the tier. It is significant to the point where a good offensive Pokemon can be evaluated by its ability to handle Regimola, as it's often called, as well as Flygon in the back. This contributes to why it is a definitive part of the tier. And Flygon finally gained some power, learning Dragon Dance in this generation and gaining access to the nuke-like power of Z-moves. Although no one ever had any illusion it would hold up in overuse, which was far beyond Flygon's capabilities for a long time now, even without the new Celesteela and the 4 fairy-type Tapus. under use remained at similar levels of power, but in rarely used, its new Dragon Dance set did pretty well. Despite being quite similar to Zygarde 10%, Flygon can afford to run an adamant nature and thus can nail KOs on things such as Milotic. It can also run Iron Tail for a big smack on Gardevoir, who traces Levitate and is thus immune to Earthquake, while destroying Florges and Whimsicott. Its Choice Scarf set has returned once again, and it was said back in Generation 4 that Flygon was synonymous with Choice Scarf, and 3 generations later, it still seems to hold true. Flygon never really had the opportunity to shine in VGC, and it simply doesn't have the tools or stats to keep up with such a mega and fairy-infested metagame. The only time it's seen use is by Gary Quinn, who reached top 16 in the Anaheim 2017 Regional and 21st in the US Internationals. He made use of its new access to Dragon Dance alongside Ground DMZ, with EVs to outspeed Arcanine, and after a Dragon Dance, Adamant Scarf, Garchomp, and Modest Scarf Nihil Eagle. Flygon actually walled common non-Scarf Garchomp variants and could pose a real sweeping threat, so props to Gary for finding a way to use it effectively. However, overall, Flygon just isn't going to be effective way more often than not. And that's it. So how good was Flygon actually? It was never the kind of Pokemon that would be the face of a tier through utter dominance. Its flaws saw to that, and thus it always took a back seat. However, it did always end up being an important defining Pokemon in whatever game it existed in. And while it wasn't crushing people left and right in every game, it quietly put in consistent game-to-game performances, no matter the generation. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to Fall Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and of course, as I always say, comment on what Pokemon you want to see next. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, yada yada yada. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.